Welcome to GForce Minimonsta2. My name's Tom Wolfe, and in this video I'll be showing you how the synth works so that you can use it to its full potential. When you first open the synth, you'll be met with this default preset. To initialize the sound, click Browse and then click Init Patch. You'll now hear this blank sound. To turn on the oscillators, you use these switches here. Oscillator 1 is currently turned on. To turn it off, just turn this switch to the off position. To turn on oscillator 2, use this switch. And to turn on oscillator 3, use this switch. You can adjust the volume of the oscillators using the volume knob here. This knob controls the volume of oscillator 2, and this knob controls the volume of oscillator 3. In the oscillator bank section, we can change the waveform for our oscillator. On oscillators 1 and 2, you can choose between a triangle wave, a tri-saw wave, a sawtooth, a square wave, a wide rectangle, and a narrow rectangle. On oscillator 3, the tri-saw wave is replaced with an inverted sawtooth. For oscillator 1, we've added variable pulse width control, which works when you have either the square, the wide rectangle, or the narrow rectangle selected. If you want to return any parameter to its default position, just double-click on it. You can also adjust the oscillator range for each oscillator using this range switch here. You can also set each oscillator to low frequency. Oscillators 2 and 3 also have adjustable tuning. To detune either of these oscillators, use this frequency knob in the middle. If you want to enter accurate intervals, you can use the parameter window down here. Just click a parameter, double click in here, and you can type the value in. The range for either of these frequency controls is plus or minus 8 semitones. You can also determine a shortcut to step between the different intervals using a setting in the settings menu. There'll be more about this later in the video. Oscillator 3 can be decoupled from your keyboard using this switch here. When you turn this Oscillator 3 control switch off, the pitch of Oscillator 3 will no longer be controlled by your keyboard. The range of Oscillator 3 tuning is also widened. If you want to control it with your keyboard again, just switch the Oscillator 3 control switch back to on. Minimonsta2 also has a feedback control which allows you to feed the signal back into itself, causing a lot of drive. To turn this on, use this switch here next to the feedback knob and then dial it in using the volume here. As you can see, this overload light gives you visual feedback of how much you're pushing it. We also have a noise generator, which you can turn on using this switch here. You can then adjust the volume using this knob. This is adjustable between white noise and pink noise. Over on the right, you'll find the filter. To adjust the cutoff, use this cutoff frequency knob. You can also adjust the resonance using this emphasis knob. Minimonsta2 gives you access to two different filter types. Firstly, there's the classic Mini-Moog filter. This has the benefit of being authentic to the original instrument, but when using it, you lose a lot of low end when you start raising the emphasis. For this reason, we also decided to include a modern filter type. This filter has the classic sound of the original, but it also prevents the low end from being lost when you raise the resonance. If you want to track the filter frequency with the keyboard, we use these two keyboard control switches here. When they're off, playing across the keyboard won't change the frequency of the filter. If we switch on keyboard control switch number 1, we'll get a small amount of keyboard tracking. If we turn on keyboard control switch 2, we'll get a higher amount of keyboard tracking. If we switch on both switches at the same time, we'll get the full amount of keyboard tracking on the filter. In Minimonsta2, we have two different envelope types. The ADS is the classic Mini-Moog attack, decay, and sustain envelopes. As you can see, the release knob is now greyed out and we can't alter it. We also have an ADSR type which allows us full control over attack, decay, sustain, and release times. Let's start with the ADS for a classic Mini-Moog sound. We can adjust the volume using our loudness contour here. Firstly, we have the attack time, which is how long it takes for the sound to reach the maximum volume. We then also have a decay time, which sets how long it takes to go from the maximum volume to the sustain level. We can also adjust our sustain level using this knob here. Because we're in the ADS envelope type, we don't have separate control over our release. However, we can set a release time by turning on the decay button down here. Now, our decay time knob will also set our release time. When we're using the ADSR envelope type, we can also have individual control over our release time. We can also control the shape of our filter cutoff using the envelope in the filter section. This envelope can also be set to ADS with decay on or off, or ADSR envelope types. To adjust the amount of filter envelope, use this amount of contour knob here. We can also adjust other parameters using our filter envelope by using the modulation mixer. To use this, we're going to come over to this section here. The modulation mixer allows us to use a mix of different modulation sources to control either our oscillator pitch or our filter frequency. These 4 buttons here allow us to choose our different modulation sources. On the left of the mixer, we can choose either between our filter envelope, which is this bottom switch here, or whether we want the modulation source to be oscillator 3. Over on the right-hand side of the modulation mixer, we can choose whether we want our modulation source to be the LFO or whether we want it to be our noise generator. Using the Mod Mix knob here, you can also create a blend of your 2 selected modulation sources. To set a destination for your modulation mix, we use either the oscillator mod switch here or the filter mod switch here. You can also select both at the same time to modulate both the pitch and the filter frequency. At the moment, our oscillator pitch modulation switch is set to on. Let's control the oscillator pitch with our filter envelope. To do so, we want to select Filter EG and have the Mod Mix knob set all the way to 0 over here on the left. Now we can turn up the amount of modulation using this Mod Amount knob here. Of course, we can alter our envelope to change the sound. If we want to use the mod mixer to control the cutoff frequency of our filter using this envelope, we can switch off the oscillator mod switch here and turn on the filter modulation switch over here. We can also use oscillator 3 as our modulation source. To do so, we're going to leave the mod mix over to the 0 position on the left, and we're going to change this switch to our oscillator 3. Now, when we turn up the mod amount, our cutoff frequency is going to be modulated by oscillator 3. If you set the octave range to low, then oscillator 3 will act as a low frequency oscillator. At the moment, the frequency of the LFO is still being controlled by our keyboard. If we want to decouple oscillator 3 from the pitch of our keyboard, we just turn off the oscillator 3 control switch. Now, oscillator 3 will act as an independent LFO. You can, of course, change the shape of the modulation. And the rate of it. We can also use our noise generator as our modulation source. To do so, we need to turn the mod mix knob over to 10 and make sure that noise is selected. Now our modulation destination will be controlled using our noise generator. You can also adjust whether the noise source is our white noise or our pink noise. Lastly, we can use our LFO to modulate either of our destinations. To do so, we're going to leave the mod mix at 10 and we're going to switch on LFO. Now our modulation destinations will be controlled by our LFO over here. Let's turn up the mod amount. You can change the rate of the LFO by using this LFO rate knob here. You can also sync the rate to tempo by turning on this sync switch to the left here. Now our LFO rate will be synced to your tempo. You can also change the shape of the LFO from a triangle wave to a square wave using this switch here. Don't forget you can adjust the amount of modulation using the mod amount knob up here. We We can also use this LFO to modulate our oscillator pitch. And we can also modulate our filter at the same time, just by leaving both switches turned on. Lastly, we can blend either our oscillator 3 or filter modulation source with our noise or LFO modulation source. Let's turn up our mod amount. Now let's blend our LFO with our oscillator 3. To do this, all we need to do is set a value anywhere between 10 and 0. Minimonsta2 features our unique advanced modulation system, X-Modifiers. To access them, just hit this Extend tab here. You'll now see that the synth has gained this new area up the top here. You'll find our X-Modifiers in this section here. The X-Modifier system gives you a unique LFO and envelope for nearly every parameter on the synth, allowing for some incredibly advanced modulation. To select a parameter for modulating, just click on the parameter. When we have this top panel extended, you'll see this box appear around the parameter. That means that this parameter is now selected for modulation. You can also see the parameter name in the parameter boxes above the XLFO and XADSR. If we select another parameter, you can see that changes. Let's set up some pulse width modulation on oscillator 1. To start modulating the pulse width with our XLFO, just turn up the amp slider. The higher the value, the more modulation you'll get. Using the waveform selection on the left panel over here, we can choose the shape of our modulation. We can choose a sine wave, a triangle wave, a ramp up, ramp down, cosine up, cosine down, square, random, red noise, and brown noise. To adjust the rate of the modulation, use the time slider. You can also sync the XLFO and XADSR times to tempo using this switch here. You can also add a delay to the start of the modulation. This will also sync to tempo when the tempo sync switch is on. You can also add an element of randomization to your modulation using the sample and hold slider, which will randomly pick parts of the modulation and hold them. When this is set to 0%, you won't get any randomization. At lower values, the sample and hold will be much quicker. As you can hear, at higher values, it's much slower. You can also smooth out the modulation using the smooth slider. Let's set this to a square wave. As you can hear, it's incredibly jumpy. If we turn this slider up, we'll start hearing it smoothing out. We can also set the retriggering and phase of our LFO using the sync slider. When it's set to 0%, this will retrigger on every key press. To demonstrate this, let's set up an LFO on our cutoff frequency. Every time I press a key, it will retrigger from the start of the phase of the sine wave. We can adjust the start point in the waveform using this sync slider. At 50%, it'll start halfway through the phase of that waveform. Setting it to 25% will allow us to go from the peak of a sine wave setting it to 75% will allow us to go from the trough of the sine wave. We can also turn off the retriggering by putting this slider all the way to the top. As you can see, it now says off. This means that the modulation will be free-flowing, and every time I press a key, you'll hear a different part of that modulation cycle. The X-Modifiers also give us an advanced envelope called the XADSR that we can use to modulate most of the parameters on the synth. For this example, let's modulate the pitch of Oscillator 2. To set the amount of modulation, we use the amp knob here. If we turn the amp knob to the right, then we'll modulate our parameter above the set parameter value. If we set the amp control to a negative value, then it will modulate below our set parameter value. When our tempo sync switch is on, the different times set in our different stages of the envelope will be synced to our tempo. If we don't want to sync this to tempo, then we can turn this off. It's worth noting that the tempo sync is universal, so if you turn it on for one of your X-Modifiers, then all of your X-Modifiers will either be synced or not synced. Our attack time sets how long it takes to get to the peak of our modulation. The decay slider determines how long it takes to get from that peak to our sustain level. The S start slider determines our sustain level. At 0, it will sustain at our parameter value. If we turn this all the way to the top, then it will sustain at the full amount set by our amp knob. Any value in between will allow us to sustain at a position between the top of our modulation and our parameter value. If we go below 0, that will allow us to sustain in the negative range. So if we have a positive amp value, our attack and decay will set the amount of time it takes to go above that parameter value, and then the sustain level will be set in the negative range down here. The S time slider determines how long our sound sustains for. While sustaining, our envelope will be gradually moving back towards the original parameter value. The S time determines how long that will take. A high value will sustain for longer. However, a lower value will quickly move back towards that original parameter value. The release slider will determine how long it takes to reach our original parameter value when we release the key. We can also control this using velocity, using our velocity knob over here. If we turn this knob all the way to the right, then we'll get the full amount of velocity control. This means that if we press the notes lightly, then we won't get much modulation, and if we press them heavily, we'll get a lot of modulation. If we set the velocity knob to a negative value, then that will reverse, meaning that the heavier we play, the less modulation we'll get. If you like the modulation that you have set up on one parameter and want to take it to another parameter, then you can use the duplication functions here. Let's set up an LFO on our cutoff frequency. If we like that sound, we can copy it and then click on another parameter and then hit the paste button. You'll now see that our modulation has been copied to this new parameter. We can do this as many times as we want. If you want to get rid of a modulation quickly, just use the clear button. Minimonsta2 features 4 macros that allow you to assign different parameters for easy manipulation of your sounds. You'll find the macros in this section down here. To assign a parameter to a macro, click and drag this cross to the right of it and drop it on the parameter that you want to assign. To set the amount, right-click on the parameter and drag. You'll see the marker indicates where your macro will take you. If right-click doesn't work for you, then you can change the shortcut for setting your macros in the settings. We'll have a look at how to do this later in the video. You can assign multiple parameters to a single macro, but you can only assign a single parameter to one macro. If you then want to assign that parameter to a different macro, just drag it onto that parameter, and as you can see in the numbers box here, this one now only has 2 modulation routings, whereas this one now has 1 routing. That shows us that it's been removed from macro 1 and put onto macro 2. We can quickly view what is assigned to a macro by clicking on the macro. You'll see the green markings appear on the assigned parameters. You can also view and edit your assignments by clicking on the box next to the macro. From here you can see that we've got it assigned to oscillator 2 amp and filter frequency, and we can also see the amount. From here we can remove an assignment, or if we want to get rid of them all at the same time, we can just select Remove All. Minimonsta2 allows us to set various performance controls using the performance area up here. We can assign a number of different things to either velocity or aftertouch to give us a lot more playability to our sounds. To select a parameter for velocity control, you can use this box here. You can either flick through using the arrows, or if you want to see all of the modulation possibilities, just right-click. For velocity, we can control gain, our cutoff frequency, our filter contour amount, the emphasis of our filter, the feedback, and macros 1 through 4. So say I want to control my cutoff frequency via velocity. I'm going to select VCF. With VCF selected, we can now turn up the velocity knob. Now, with softer velocities, we'll get darker sounds, while the heavier we play, we'll get brighter sounds. You can, of course, dial this in to taste. We can also set up multiple velocity controls at the same time. So say I also want to control the filter emphasis. I can select the emphasis, turn up the velocity amount, so on heavier velocities I get more emphasis, and on lower velocities I get less. But you can also see that I'm still getting control of my VCF frequency. Using the macros, we can also have control of any parameter that's not available in this list. So for example, say you want the volume of oscillator 2 to be controlled by velocity. You can assign it to a macro, set the amount on that macro, and then turn up the velocity amount on that macro. Now, at softer velocities, we'll get less of oscillator 2, and at harder velocities, we'll get more of it. We can also do the same with Aftertouch. Our Aftertouch destinations are gain, cutoff frequency, filter emphasis, feedback, our mod amount, our LFO rate, and our macros 1 through 4. So say I want to set some vibrato on Aftertouch. Let's set our modulation amount. At the moment, the mod amount is set to 0. To be controlled by our LFO, we want to make sure that the mod mix is set all the way to 10 and the LFO is selected. We also want to make sure our oscillator mod switch is on and that our filter mod switch is switched off. Now let's turn up the Aftertouch amount. Just like with the velocity, we can also set multiple things to happen on our Aftertouch. So let's say we also want to increase our LFO rate. And let's brighten the sound a little bit as well. Minimonsta2 has a delay and a reverb effect. To turn on the delay, press this switch here. You can set the amount of delay using the amount knob. You can adjust the left and right delay times independently using the left and right delay time knobs. If you want to set them both to the same value, use this link switch, and then when you drag them, they'll both move. If you want to sync the delay time to your tempo, just switch on the delay sync button here. Now, as we move the time knob, you can see it's synced to your tempo. You can also feed the left and right delay signals into each other to create a ping-pong style effect using the cross-feed switch here. If you want to turn up the feedback, you can use the feedback knob here. To turn the reverb on, use this switch here. The reverb comes with 5 presets so that you can dial in the correct reverb sound quickly. These include a slapback reverb, a small reverb, a medium reverb, a large reverb, and a huge reverb. To adjust the reverb level, use the amount knob. The size knob sets the size of the reverb from small to large and the decay sets the decay time from short to long. You can also add a pre-delay using the pre-delay knob. You can also set a level of modulation for your reverb. For no modulation, set the depth to 0. You can dial this in to taste. You can also change the speed of the modulation using the frequency knob, from slow to fast. You can also use the filter knob to filter the reverb. To the left, you'll get a low pass filter that cuts out the top end. To the right, you'll get a high pass filter that filters out the low end. When you've found a delay or reverb sound that you like, you can lock the effect in using the FX lock buttons. For the delay, you can lock it using this lock button here. As you can see, when it's locked, it greys out the effect. To lock in the reverb effect, use this FX lock here. Now you won't be able to change any of the parameters. This is especially useful for when you're flicking through presets and you want to keep the same effects. As you can see, when I go through presets, my delay and reverb stay the same. Minimonsta2 features 5 different playing modes which can be set down here. When mono is selected, that means that one note can be played at a time and every note you press will re-trigger the envelopes. If you select legato, you'll still only be able to play one note at a time, but if you tie notes, then the envelopes won't be re-triggered. With unison on, our voices will be stacked. We can set the number of voices using the polyphony control here. If it's set to 2, it'll stack 2 voices on top of each other. If we set it to 16, it'll stack 16 voices. We can then use the Detune control to offset the tuning of those voices. When in unison, we can still choose between mono and legato. Lastly, we can select poly, which allows us to play numerous notes at the same time. We can limit the number of voices available to us in polyphonic mode using the polyphony box here. This ranges from 1 voice to 16 voices. If you want the pitch to glide between notes, then use the glide knob here. We also have a legato switch. When this switch is turned off, it will glide between notes no matter how we play them. With the legato switch on, it'll only glide between notes that are played legato. The Tune knob allows us to set a global tuning for the instrument. This ranges from an octave below to an octave above. The bend range allows us to set the amount of pitch bend that we want when using our pitch bend wheel. This can range from 2 semitones all the way up to 48 semitones. If you like to have a particular bend range, then you can set it here and hit the lock button. This means that even when flicking through presets which have different bend ranges set in them, you'll keep the bend range that you like. The Vintage knob decalibrates a whole range of parameters under the hood of Minimonsta2, allowing you to give it an authentic vintage sound. When the Vintage knob is set to 0, it'll sound like a perfectly calibrated Mini Moog, whereas if you turn it all the way up, it will sound like a Mini Moog that's in desperate need of a service. This can add an authentic hardware quality to the sound. The pan spread knob allows us to spread the different voices of the synth in different directions in the stereo field. When this is set to 0, all the voices will be panned central. When the centered pan spread mode is selected here, that means that low notes will be panned to the left and high notes will be panned to the right. You can, of course, dial in the amount to taste. With the random pan spread mode selected, voices will be placed randomly in the stereo field. Minimonsta2 also has a dedicated pan knob which allows you to pan the sound to the left or the right. This is particularly useful when used with the X-Modifiers to create interesting stereo images. The Detune knob allows you to detune voices against each other. When this is set to 0, the voices will be perfectly in tune. When we turn this up, they'll start to shift out of tune. This can also be used with the unison mode to give a nice detuning effect between the voices. When combined with the randomized pan spread, this can give you incredibly fat sounds. The volume control allows you to adjust the overall volume of the synth. When you've created a preset that you like, you're going to want to save it. To do so, let's head to the Save menu here. This is where we can give the preset a name, add the author name, add any notes about it, name the macros, and also tag it so that it's easy to find later. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a collection. In the browser, presets are stored in collections so that you can find them easily. When your preset's finished, you can either add it to one of the existing collections by selecting it in this list here, or you can add a new collection. To do so, come down to this box here. Type in what you want to call the collection, and then hit the plus button. That will now be selected. Next, you can categorize it by adding it to one of the existing categories, or again, by adding a new one. For this preset, I'm going to select basses. Next, you can add functional type tags. So for this preset, you can see that it's in mono and that I've got unison switched on. So I'm going to select mono, and I'm going to select unison. I've also got pan spread turned on, so I'm going to select it as being wide. If you want to add any of your own type tags, use this box here. Lastly, you can add different timbres. So I'm going to say that this preset is aggressive, bright, and deep. Once again, if you want to add your own timbre tags, you can do so down here. I can add a preset name by typing into this field. I can add an author name. If you want to quickly choose from an author name that you've already added, you can use this drop down here. Next, you can add information about the preset in the notes section. In this field, you can describe the preset, or you can also add information such as what the Aftertouch does and the effect that velocity has on the preset. Then you can name your macros here. So macro 1 for me has filter frequency and the filter attack. So I'm going to name this brightness. Macro 2 controls my filter emphasis, so I'm going to call this one res. If there are any macros that you're not using, you can just leave the field blank. Now all the information is filled out. To save your preset, hit save. You can now select a location and hit the save button. You can now see that the preset is added to the preset browser, and if we come to the Inspiring Presets collection, you'll see it here. If you want to make any changes to your preset and then save them, you can do so and then quick save it. To quick save, press Command and then press the Save button. The first time you do this, you'll see this warning. This is warning you that you are now about to overwrite the saved file. You can either cancel this or you can hit OK. That makes sure that next time you try and quick save, you'll once again get the warning. Or if you're going to be doing a lot of quick saving, you can hit OK and hide. Now, when you make further changes and you come down to save and hit Command and click, it will just quick save it without giving you the warning. Lastly, if you want to get rid of any of the information that's stored with this preset in these boxes, just hit the Clear Boxes button. In Minimonsta2, the 800 plus presets can be accessed using the preset browser. To access this, press Browse here. The powerful preset browser allows you to narrow in on certain types of presets using the tagging system that we have available. Firstly, you can access presets that are saved in various different collections. Included with Minimonsta2 are the classic presets. Those are the presets that are taken from one of the original Minimoog patch books. There's the presets from Minimonsta1. There's the brand new presets in Minimonsta2. There's also a collection of presets from Minimonsta1 created by Rick Wakeman. And there's a user collection which contains the init patch and gives you a place for you to save your presets. Let's select Minimonsta2. Next, you can choose a category. Here we've got basses, effects, hits, keys, leads, pads, sequences, and textures. In the next column, we can sort by types. So this includes stuff such as whether it's legato, mono, poly, whether it's got unison on, whether it's a wide sound, whether there's a chord built into the preset, if it's dynamic, evolving, if it's got glide turned on, if it's got a long release, slow attack, if it's percussive, if it's a pluck. All of these things can be found here. Lastly, we can also sort by the actual timbre and characteristics of the sound, such as being aggressive, deep, dirty, hollow, metallic, sharp, soft, thin. So I want to find a pad. To start with, I want to find a pad that swells, and I want to find one that's dark. Let's go back and have a look at bases. If I want to select multiple tags, I can do so by pressing Command. We can decide with this button how we handle it. When it's set to OR, selecting multiple tags will mean that we get one sound or another sound. So for instance, say I want a bass synth that is gliding or mono, then I can select both using the Command button, and you'll see that it increases the pool. If I set this button to AND, that means I will only see presets that are a combination of all of the tags that I select. So for instance, if I want something that's aggressive and something that's dark, you'll see it narrows down the selection. So now I want to find a sound that's a lead. I want it to be legato and gliding. And I want it to be dirty and sharp. Say I like that preset, you can add it to your favourites by hitting the little heart to the right of the preset. If you decide you want to remove a preset from your favourites, just press the heart again. Pressing this button here allows you to decide how to sort the presets. At the moment, it's being sorted by alpha patches. Alpha patches are the presets that we have chosen that we feel best represents the capabilities of this synth. Each preset that is in the alpha list is marked with this alpha sign just next to the favourites. When it's sorted by alpha patches, the alpha patches will appear at the top in an order that we have set. And then when you reach the end of the alpha patches, it will be in a descending alphabetical order. You can also choose to have it in a descending alphabetical order, which ignores the alpha presets and places it A to Z, or you can choose to sort it by Z to A. Lastly, if you have a number of presets that are favorited, you can choose to sort it by your favorites. That will then place your favorites at the top so that you can access them nice and easily. If you can't decide on a preset to use or you're just looking for some inspiration, you can hit the random button. This will randomly select a preset using your different tags over here. If you want to select from the entire range of presets in Minimonsta, make sure all is selected. Or if you want to narrow it down a bit, for instance, you know you want a preset from Minimonsta2, you want it to be a lead, and you want it to be legato, you can narrow it down using the tags and then let it pick from these presets for you. If you're going to be using Minimonsta2 for performances and you want easy access to certain presets, hit the Program Change button. This will give you access to a range of slots for you to add presets to. To add a preset, just drag it and then drop it into a slot. If you want to drag and drop multiple presets at the same time, select one, hit the Command button and select Other Presets, and then drag them over. This will then place them in order. Now, when you send program change information to Minimonsta, you can easily swap between presets. If you want to get rid of your program change list, just hit this button here. Minimonsta2's browser gives you powerful control over where you save your presets. To access this, head to this little folder icon above the collection in the browser. Here you can see the location of your factory directory and your user directory. If you want to add more preset locations, hit the plus button, choose the location, and then hit open. This will now read any presets that are stored in this folder. You can also add multiple extra directories. To remove any directories, just select it and press the minus button. You can also change the location of your user directory. To do this, click on it, then hit the plus button. Now select the folder and hit open. You'll now see that the location of my user directory has changed. If you want to go back to the factory settings, hit reset. You can also change the default save location by hitting this folder and choosing where you want to save your presets. On the right of this page, you'll see a list of the collections that you have available in Minimonsta2. Minimonsta2 gives you the ability to export your collections as a single file. So if you're trying to transfer presets across computers or share them with your friends, then this is how you do it. Firstly, select the collection that you want to export. Hit the export button and choose a location for it, and then hit save. It's as simple as that. If you want to get rid of a collection quickly, just select it and hit the delete button. As you can see, the collection has now gone. To import a collection, just hit the import button, locate the mmv2 col file, select it and hit open. That collection will now be added to your browser. So when you leave this page, by hitting the crosshair, you'll now see that the presets in that collection are in my browser. When working with Minimonsta2, you can use the undo and redo buttons to go backwards and forwards through steps and changes that you've made. So say I turn the cutoff frequency down, the emphasis up, turn the attack up. I can undo those moves by pressing the undo button. If I then decide I want to redo them, I can press the redo button. When Minimonsta is being used in a DAW, then the tempo of the instrument will be automatically synced to the host. This will affect the tempo when we turn on tempo syncing on the LFO rate, on the X-Modifiers, and on the delay. When using Minimonsta2 in standalone mode, we can set the tempo using the tempo box here. The hold switch can be used to hold any notes being played into Minimonsta. To do this, you can either turn it on and then press a note, or you can press a note and then turn it on. The note will be held until you turn the hold switch off. In Minimonsta2, you can map your MIDI controllers to different parameters in the synth using the MIDI CC mode. To access this, press the MIDI CC button here. To make an assignment, simply select a parameter and then move the control that you want to use on your MIDI controller. You can then do this on other parameters. To exit MIDI CC mode, press the MIDI CC button again. You'll now see that when I move one of the controls on my MIDI controller, it will move the parameter in the synth. If you want to get rid of a single routing, just double click it. If you want to get rid of all of your routings at once, press the clear button here. This will then come up with a warning so that you can't accidentally get rid of all of your assignments. If you don't want to get rid of your assignments, just hit cancel. If you do, then hit yes, and you'll see that all your assignments have been removed. To access Minimonsta's settings menu, use this cog here. Here you'll find the various options available to you. Firstly, you can change the skin of the synth. You can select from black, dark wood, or light wood. You can choose whether the audio tail of the synth is cut off when the host door is stopped. You can set the internal buffer size, which improves the quality of the synth at a cost of CPU. You can change the size of the patch browser font. You can set the sensitivity of the mod wheel, or you can even turn the mod wheel off, leaving you to freely assign CC1 to any parameter on the synth. You can choose how long parameter changes are displayed on the parameter display. And you can choose the shortcut for your macro amount adjustment from Command/Control, right-clicking, or Alt. And you can choose what your stepped VCO tune adjustment modifier is from the same three options. If you're running Minimonsta2 in standalone, you'll also find extra options. These allow you to set the output interface, the active output channels from your interface, the sample rate, the audio buffer size, your active MIDI inputs, and the active MIDI channel. If you're using Minimonsta2 in your DAW, then all of these settings will be set by your DAW. The interface of Minimonsta2 is fully scalable. To change the size of the interface to suit your needs, just drag this little corner over here. So now you know how to use Minimonsta2, and we hope that you'll have a lot of fun with it. Thanks for watching.